MKUltra, the man in the white coat is smiling. He's holding a glass of water. He tells you it's safe. You drink it. 20 minutes later, your vision fractures into geometric patterns. The walls breathe. Your sense of self dissolves. You didn't volunteer for this. You're a soldier, and your government just dosed you with LSD without your knowledge or consent. Welcome to MKUltra. The year is 1953. In a locked laboratory at Building 213, Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, the Central Intelligence Agency launches a program that will become the darkest chapter in American medical ethics. On April 13th, CIA Director Allen Dulles approves a project with the cryptonym MKUltra. The mission: perfect mind control techniques and create Manchurian candidates through drugs, electroshock, sensory deprivation, and torture. For 20 years, the program operates in shadow. At least 80 institutions participate, including 44 colleges, 15 research foundations, 12 hospitals, and 3 prisons. The budget reaches an estimated $25 million, over $200 million in today's money. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb leads the program, personally administering LSD to unwitting subjects. One of them is Frank Olson, a CIA biochemist. On November 28, 1953, 9 days after being dosed without his consent, Olson plunges from a 10th floor hotel window in New York. The death is ruled a suicide. His family believes he was murdered. The experiments span the country. At California's Vacaville prison and Pennsylvania's Holmesburg facility, inmates become test subjects with no informed consent. In Montreal, Canadian psychiatrist Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron conducts what he calls depatterning experiments, funded secretly by the CIA. He administers electroshock at up to 40 times normal intensity. Patients are placed in drug-induced comas lasting 65 days. The goal of Subproject 68 is to erase existing personalities and rebuild them from scratch. No one follows up to see if there are long-term effects on the subjects. Over 149 subprojects are documented before CIA Director Richard Helms orders the destruction of all MKUltra records in 1973. Hours before, he's scheduled to testify to Congress. But a filing error saves 20,000 documents. And in 1975, the Church Committee investigating CIA abuses brings them into the light. New York Times journalist Seymour Hersh breaks the story. Congressional hearings reveal decades of illegal human experiments on American citizens. The CIA's explanation follows a familiar pattern. MKUltra was defensive, they claim. Korean War POWs appeared brainwashed, and the agency needed to understand communist mind control techniques to protect American personnel. When ethical violations were discovered, the program was terminated. Helms destroyed records to protect unwitting participants' privacy, but the timeline doesn't fit. MKUltra began in April 1953, before the Korean War armistice was signed in July. And if Helms wanted to protect subjects, why did he destroy documents hours before congressional testimony? The 20,000 surviving documents represent less than 1% of total records. What was in the 99% he burned? Some researchers ask harder questions. Did MKUltra ever truly end, or did it simply go deeper underground? Victims report being used in experiments into the 1980s, long after the program's supposed termination. The surviving documents show systematic violations spanning 2 decades. Was MKUltra a failed program, or was it successful, with results that remain classified? How many total victims exist? Estimates range from hundreds to tens of thousands. What happened to subjects after experiments ended? No follow-up care was ever provided. And the most disturbing question: did the program create functional Manchurian candidates, or were all attempts failures? We may never know. The answers burned in 1973. From mind control experiments hidden in laboratories, we moved to false flag operations planned in the Pentagon. Operation Northwoods. The document is stamped Top Secret and signed by America's highest-ranking military officers. It proposes sinking American ships, shooting down passenger planes, and staging terrorist attacks in U.S. cities, all to be blamed on Cuba as justification for invasion. President Kennedy reads it and writes one word in the margin: no. March 13th, 1962. In the Pentagon Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest echelon of American military leadership completes a memorandum titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. Chairman Lyman Lemnitzer and every member of the Joint Chiefs sign it. The proposals inside would remain classified for 35 years. The document outlines a series of false flag operations designed to generate public support for war with Cuba. One proposal suggests recreating a Remember the Maine incident by sinking a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blaming Castro. Another recommends staging funerals for mock victims to generate public outrage. A third proposes creating a communist Cuban terror campaign in Miami area, using friendly assets disguised as Castro agents. The plans grow darker. One suggests shooting down a chartered civilian aircraft and claiming American students were aboard. Another recommends blowing up an unmanned drone aircraft, then manufacturing pieces of wreckage to prove Cuban involvement. Yet another proposes staging an attack on Guantanamo Naval Base using friendly Cubans dressed in Cuban military uniforms. These weren't idle musings scribbled on a napkin. This was an official memorandum, typed on Pentagon letterhead, routed through proper channels, and presented to the President of the United States for approval. Every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously approved it. Kennedy rejected the plan outright. By October 1962, he had removed Lemnitzer as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The document vanished into classified archives until 1997, when the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Review Board declassified it as part of JFK Files release. Investigative journalist James Bamford published details in his 2001 book, Body of Secrets. The National Security Archive authenticated the signed memorandum as genuine. Military historians offer explanations rooted in Cold War desperation. The Bay of Pigs invasion had failed just months earlier. The Joint Chiefs believed Castro posed an existential threat requiring immediate action. The proposals represented brainstorming of all possible options, never intended for actual implementation. Kennedy's rejection proved the system worked, they argue. Civilian oversight prevented military excess. But this wasn't brainstorming. The document was signed by every member of the Joint Chiefs. It had gone through official channels and been presented to the President for approval. These weren't rogue officers. These were America's highest military authorities, formally recommending killing Americans to justify war. And if the Joint Chiefs approved murdering American citizens to create a pretext for invading Cuba, what other false flag operations might they have approved? 2 years later, the Gulf of Tonkin incident escalated the Vietnam War, based on attacks on U.S. ships that were later revealed to be questionable or fabricated. Operation Northwoods proved such deceptions were official policy options on the table at the highest levels of government. Were any Northwoods proposals implemented in modified form? Did subsequent administrations receive similar plans? How many provocations that led to military action were manufactured? The declassified document raises questions that official histories never quite answer. From Pentagon offices planning terror, we descend into the streets of San Francisco, where the CIA built something darker still. Operation Midnight Climax. The room looks like any high-end brothel. Red velvet curtains, a well-stocked bar, dim lighting. But behind the mirror, a CIA operative sits with a notepad and camera, watching. The prostitute working the room is on the agency payroll. The John who just accepted a drink has no idea it's laced with LSD. In seconds, his reality will shatter, and someone will be taking notes. 1955. At 225 Chestnut Street on San Francisco's Telegraph Hill, the CIA operates a safe house unlike any other. It's furnished with pictures of tortured women, bondage equipment, and hidden cameras. Behind a two-way mirror, agents observe and record everything. This is Operation Midnight Climax, a sub-project of MKUltra, and it represents the convergence of sex, drugs, and espionage at its most depraved. The program runs from 1955 to 1965 under the CYA's Technical Services staff. George Hunter White, a former Federal Bureau of Narcotics agent, runs San Francisco operations from this safe house and at least two others, including 81 Bedford Street in New York's Greenwich Village. White recruits prostitutes and pays them $100 per session to dose and seduce targets. The subjects are chosen from society's margins: criminals, drifters, minorities, people unlikely to report their experiences, people no one would believe. White keeps a personal journal at his Stinson Beach safe house. In it he writes, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. His expense account covers liquor, prostitutes, and midnight climax parties for CIA officials. No medical supervision, no informed consent, no follow-up care for subjects whose lives might be shattered by the experience." The operation finally shuts down in 1965 when the CIA quietly admits it has produced no useful intelligence. The existence of Midnight Climax emerges in 1975 during church committee hearings. Former operative George Hunter White's journals detail the program. The San Francisco Chronicle identifies the Telegraph Hill location in 1977 through investigative reporting. Declassified CIA documents confirm what many had suspected but couldn't prove. The CIA's official explanation follows predictable lines. Midnight Climax was an unfortunate but understandable Cold War program, they claim. The Soviets were believed to be using honey traps and truth serums for espionage. The agency needed real-world testing in uncontrolled environments to understand how adversaries might use sex and drugs for intelligence purposes. When the program proved scientifically worthless, it was terminated. But the CIA already knew LSD's effects from thousands of clinical experiments. What they were testing in these brothels wasn't the drug. It was whether they could compromise and control individuals through sexual blackmail combined with drug-induced vulnerability. And if the program was scientifically worthless, why did it run for 10 full years? White's journal suggests a different answer. It continued because agency officials enjoyed the voyeurism. Some researchers argue Midnight Climax wasn't about studying drugs at all. It was a pilot program for sexual blackmail operations. The CIA was perfecting techniques later used in domestic surveillance and control of politicians, journalists, and foreign officials. The worthless intelligence claim may be a cover story masking successful operations that remain classified to this day. How many citizens were dosed in these operations? Records suggest hundreds, but White's journal hints at far more. Were any deaths or permanent psychological damage caused? No follow-up was ever conducted. Did similar operations continue under different names after 1965? The questions remain unanswered. From San Francisco safe houses, we travel south to Guatemala, where the CIA perfected a different kind of operation: the overthrow of democratically elected governments. Guatemala coup. The radio announces that rebel forces are advancing from all directions. Hundreds of soldiers, maybe thousands. The government of President Jacobo Arbenz is collapsing. Citizens of Guatemala City hide in their homes listening to the chaos unfold. But if they could see beyond the capital, they'd find something strange. The massive invasion is 480 men total, led by a CIA-backed colonel. And those terrifying radio broadcasts? Recorded in a Miami studio by CIA operative David Atlee Phillips. June 27th, 1954. Guatemala becomes the testing ground for a new kind of warfare. Not armies and tanks, but propaganda and perception. The CIA orchestrates the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government, then spends decades lying about it while Guatemala descends into a civil war that will kill 200,000 people. The operation begins in August 1953, when President Eisenhower approves a budget of $2.7 million, roughly $30 million today. The target is Jacobo Arbenz, democratically elected in 1951, with 65% of the vote. His crime, Decree 900, passed in 1952, which redistributes uncultivated land to landless peasants, compensating owners at the value they themselves had declared for tax purposes. The United Fruit Company owns 550,000 acres in Guatemala, but cultivates only 15%. Under Arbenz's land reform, they stand to lose massive holdings. The company's board of directors includes CIA Director Alan Dulles' former law partner and Secretary of State John Foster Dulles. The connections run deep. The CIA trains 480 rebel soldiers in Honduras under Carlos Castillo Armas. A propaganda campaign labels Arbenz a communist, despite no evidence of Soviet ties. The bogus Voice of Liberation radio station creates the illusion of a massive popular uprising. CIA pilots fly bombing missions in unmarked aircraft, striking Guatemala City from June 18th through June 27th. On June 27th, after the U.S. ambassador tells him a direct American invasion is imminent, Arbenz resigns. Castillo Armas is installed as dictator and immediately reverses all land reforms. Guatemala descends into a 36-year civil war from 1960 to 1996. 200,000 people die. 93% are killed by U.S.-backed government forces. Details emerge slowly. The Church Committee hearings in the 1970s reveal fragments. In 1997, the CIA releases CIA and Guatemala assassination proposals, 1952 to 1954. In 1999, the agency publishes a comprehensive history acknowledging PBSUCESS as a coup. The National Security Archive obtains additional documents through Freedom of Information Act requests in 2003 and 2011. Cold War historians defend the operation. Guatemala was genuinely threatened by communist infiltration, they argue. Soviet influence was expanding in Latin America. Arbenz's advisors included known communists. The land reform, while seeming reasonable, followed Marxist patterns. The operation prevented Soviet expansion into America's backyard and protected U.S. economic interests critical to national security. But declassified CIA documents tell a different story. A 1954 CIA analysis admits there was no evidence of Soviet control. The agency acknowledges the agrarian reform is a powerful propaganda weapon, but concedes it was popular and democratic. The coup wasn't about security. It was about banana profits. Guatemala becomes the template. After PB success succeeds, the CIA uses the same playbook across Latin America. Iran in 1953, the failed Cuba attempt in 1961, Brazil in 1964, Chile in 1973. The pattern repeats. Destabilize through propaganda, arm a small rebel force, use covert action to create the illusion of massive opposition, install a friendly dictator. Did United Fruit Company directly fund the operation beyond lobbying? How many civilians died in the CIA bombing raids? Would Guatemala's civil war have happened without the coup? The official histories remain incomplete. From Guatemala to Vietnam, where the CIA didn't just overthrow governments. They built an industrial assassination machine. Phoenix program? The Provincial Reconnaissance Unit arrives after midnight. They have a list. The village chief is on it, suspected of Viet Cong sympathies. They drag him from his home, tie his hands, and interrogate him in front of his family. When he won't talk, they move to enhanced techniques. By morning, he's dead. One of 26,369 neutralized that year. The program has a name, Phoenix, and it's just getting started. December 1967. A rural village in Quang Ngai Province, South Vietnam. The CIA and South Vietnamese government launch a systematic assassination program that will kill at least 26,000 people over the next 5 years. Many of them are civilians. Most die based on unreliable intelligence and quota systems. This is Phoenix, and it's essentially industrialized murder disguised as counterinsurgency. The program operates officially from December 1967 to 1972, though tactics continue through 1975. It's coordinated by CIA officer William Colby, who will later become CIA director from 1973 to 1976. Colby creates provincial reconnaissance units, death squads operating outside normal military command structure. They answer to no one. Official statistics tell part of the story. Between 1967 and 1971, 26,369 Viet Cong infrastructure killed, 33,358 captured. The targets include anyone suspected of VC sympathy, village chiefs, teachers, tax collectors, family members of suspected guerrillas. A quota system requires each district to neutralize a set number of targets monthly. Meet your quota or explain why you failed. K. Barton Osborne, a Phoenix Program Intelligence Officer, testifies before Congress in July 1971. He describes witnessing detainees thrown from helicopters during interrogation. Electric shock applied to genitals. Insertion of 6-inch wooden dowel rods into ears, driven through to the brain. Interrogation centers use water torture, later called waterboarding. Rape. Systematic beatings. The tiger cages on Con Son Island hold political prisoners in 5-foot by 9-foot cells. A congressional delegation documents the conditions in 1970. William Colby admits to Congress that around 20,000 were killed, but claims most were legitimate targets. South Vietnamese officials later admit many were killed based on personal vendettas, land disputes, or to settle old scores. No judicial process, no trials, no verification of intelligence, just names on lists and bodies in ditches. Newsweek publishes leaked details in July 1970. The Pentagon Papers released in 1971 and declassified MACV documents reveal operational details that the military had tried to suppress. Military historians defend Phoenix as legitimate counterinsurgency. The Viet Cong use civilians as cover, they argue, making conventional warfare impossible. In guerrilla warfare, difficult choices must be made. While regrettable, the program disrupted enemy operations and saved American lives. Abuses occurred but weren't systematic. But the quota system proves otherwise. When you mandate each district produce X number of neutralized targets monthly, you're not gathering intelligence. You're creating body counts. Osborne testifies that detainees were often selected randomly to meet quotas. South Vietnamese officials used the program to eliminate political rivals who had nothing to do with the Viet Cong. Phoenix wasn't counterinsurgency gone wrong. Some researchers argue it worked exactly as designed. The goal wasn't distinguishing combatants from civilians, but terrorizing rural populations into compliance. By making everyone a potential target, the program aimed to make supporting the VC too dangerous. It was state terrorism, with a quota system to ensure it stayed industrial scale. What was the real death toll? 26,369 is only the official count. Actual numbers are likely far higher. How many victims were genuine VC versus civilians caught in quota systems? Did Phoenix program tactics migrate to other conflicts? Similar programs appear in El Salvador in the 1980s and Afghanistan in the 2000s. The techniques don't die, they evolve. From Vietnam's villages, we move to South America, where Phoenix tactics went multinational. Operation Condor. The intelligence chiefs from 6 nations sit around a conference table in Santiago, Chile. Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, Brazil. They're not discussing trade or diplomacy. They're organizing a network to hunt dissidents across borders, share torture techniques, and disappear thousands of people. The CIA will provide communications, training, and most importantly, silence. Operation Condor is born, November 25th, 1975. At DINA headquarters in Santiago, Chilean intelligence chief Manuel Contreras hosts a secret meeting. 6 South American military dictatorships are about to create a multinational assassination network. With CIA knowledge and support, they will murder and disappear an estimated 60,000 people across multiple continents, tracking dissidents from Buenos Aires to Rome to Washington, D.C. The participating nations are Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil. Later, Ecuador and Peru join. Operations are coordinated through a computerized database at U.S. Southern Command in Panama. The CIA provides Condor Tel, a communications network linking the participating intelligence agencies. It's the infrastructure for international murder. On October 6, 1976, Operation Condor reaches American soil. Orlando Letelier, a Chilean exile and former ambassador, is assassinated by a car bomb in Washington, D.C. The bomb detonates on Embassy Row, killing Letelier and his American colleague, Ronnie Moffett. A foreign government just committed an act of terrorism in the U.S. Capitol, using techniques taught by American intelligence. The scale is staggering. An estimated 60,000 deaths, 30,000 disappeared, 400,000 imprisoned across participating nations. Death flights dump drugged prisoners into the Atlantic Ocean from military aircraft. Cross-border special teams kidnap and murder dissidents in foreign countries. A 1976 cable from U.S. Ambassador to Paraguay Robert White warns the State Department about special teams targeted for assassination, but no action is taken. The truth emerges slowly. In 1992, Paraguayan lawyer Martin Almada discovers the Archives of Terror in a police station in Lambaré, Paraguay. Thousands of documents detail cross-border operations, torture techniques, and prisoner exchanges. Declassified U.S. documents released in 1999 and 2000 confirm CIA knowledge. Argentine courts begin trials of Condor operatives in 2013. A 2013 Buenos Aires court convicts 15 military officers for Condor crimes. In 2016, Argentina sentences Reinaldo Biñón, a former dictator, to 20 years for Condor operations. Cold War defenders argue South American dictatorships faced genuine threats. Armed leftist guerrillas backed by Cuba and the Soviet Union were conducting terrorism and insurrection. The Tupamaros in Uruguay, Montoneros in Argentina, and MIR in Chile posed real dangers. Condor represented regional cooperation against transnational threats. While excesses occurred, the alternative was communist takeover. But the Archives of Terror prove most victims weren't guerrillas. They were students, teachers, union organizers, priests, journalists, people whose crime was opposing dictatorships or advocating for workers' rights. And the CIA didn't just know about Condor. Declassified documents show the agency provided the communications infrastructure and training. A 1978 State Department memo explicitly warns Condor could create severe problems for U.S. policy, but recommends not interfering. Some researchers draw a different conclusion. Condor wasn't about fighting communism. It was about crushing anyone opposing U.S. economic interests. The timing reveals the pattern. Operations intensify after Chile's 1973 coup, which overthrows Salvador Allende, who had nationalized copper mines, and installs Augusto Pinochet, who privatizes everything. Condor targets labor organizers. economists proposing wealth redistribution, and journalists investigating U.S. corporate interests. It's union busting at an international scale. How many operations occurred on U.S. soil beyond the Letelier assassination? What was the full extent of CIA support? Many documents remain partially redacted. Are similar networks operating today under different names? The infrastructure for Condor didn't vanish. It went dark. From state-sponsored death squads, we return to U.S. soil, where the CIA's Condor allies funded their operations through a different kind of violence, flooding American cities with cocaine. Dark Alliance. Reporter Gary Webb sits at his desk at the San Jose Mercury News, staring at the front page he's about to publish. 3 words: Dark Alliance. The story will detail how CIA-backed Nicaraguan Contras flooded Los Angeles with cocaine in the 1980s, how the agency knew and did nothing, and how crack cocaine destroyed black communities while funding an illegal war. In 8 years, Gary Webb will be dead. 2 bullets in his head, ruled a suicide. August 18th, 1996. Webb publishes a 3-part series backed by over 1,000 pages of court documents, DEA reports, and interviews. The story connects dots that major newspapers had missed or ignored. The CIA protected cocaine traffickers who were smuggling tons of drugs into American cities because the traffickers were funding the Contras, an illegal war Congress had explicitly banned. The Nicaraguan Contras, funded by the CIA to overthrow the Sandinista government, needed money after Congress passed the Boland Amendment from 1982 to 1984, banning aid. Danilo Blandon and Norwin Meneses, Contra supporters, imported cocaine through Freeway Rick Ross in Los Angeles. Blandon testifies in federal court that millions of dollars went to the Contra war effort. Ross distributes cocaine in LA at wholesale prices, fueling the crack epidemic that devastates inner cities. DEA reports document Contra drug connections as early as 1984, but investigations are repeatedly blocked. The 1988 Kerry Committee report, issued by Senator John Kerry's Subcommittee on Narcotics and Terrorism after a 2-year investigation, concludes, senior U.S. policymakers were not immune to the idea that drug money was a perfect solution to the Contras' funding problems. The 1,166-page report details how the CIA prioritized covert operations over drug interdiction. In 1998, CIA Inspector General Frederick Hitz releases a 2-volume report. The agency admits it knew over 50 Contras were involved in drug trafficking. The report confirms the CIA blocked DEA and FBI investigations into Contra traffickers. It's not passive knowledge. It's active protection. Webb's series triggers a firestorm, but instead of investigating the CIA, major newspapers attack Webb. The Los Angeles Times, New York Times, and Washington Post publish articles defending the agency and questioning Webb's reporting. The Mercury News forces Webb to resign in 1997. His career is destroyed. His marriage falls apart. On December 10th, 2004, Gary Webb is found dead in his apartment. 2 gunshot wounds to the head. The coroner rules it suicide. 2 bullets to the head is extremely rare for suicide, though forensically possible. The timing raises questions no one adequately answers. Webb died after years of professional isolation and character assassination. Some see murder, others see a broken man. The truth remains unclear. The CIA and major newspapers argue Webb's series was oversimplified and lacked proof of the CIA directly importing drugs. While some Contra associates trafficked cocaine, this wasn't official CIA policy, they claim. The agency was focused on fighting communism in Central America. Any drug trafficking was incidental. The crack epidemic had multiple causes unrelated to Contra funding, but the CIA's own Inspector General admitted the agency knew about trafficking and actively blocked law enforcement investigations. That's not incidental. That's policy. When the choice is between stopping drug traffickers and protecting a covert operation, the CIA chooses the operation. Every time. Dark Alliance reveals a pattern. The CIA repeatedly prioritizes covert operations over law enforcement. Air America flew heroin from Laos during the Vietnam War. Contras ran cocaine during Nicaragua. Taliban allies trafficked opium during Afghanistan. Each time, the agency chooses its operation over drug interdiction. What Webb discovered wasn't an aberration. It was standard operating procedure. How much cocaine was trafficked with CIA protection? Estimates range from hundreds to thousands of tons. Are similar operations ongoing with current U.S.-backed groups? The pattern suggests the question isn't whether it's happening now, but where. From flooding cities with drugs, we turn to flooding minds with propaganda. The CIA's infiltration of American media. Operation Mockingbird. You open your morning newspaper. Maybe it's the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or Time magazine. The article you're reading about Soviet intentions, or Cuba, or Guatemala, was written by a professional journalist, fact-checked, and published by a respected outlet. What you don't know is that the journalist is on the CIA payroll. The story was planted by the agency, and the editor who approved it is a willing participant. Welcome to Operation Mockingbird. 1948. The CIA's Office of Policy Coordination, directed by Frank Wisner, begins recruiting American journalists to plant propaganda, spy on reporters, and manipulate public opinion. By the early 1950s, the agency has relationships with over 25 newspapers and wire services. American media is becoming an extension of intelligence operations. Carl Bernstein, the Watergate reporter, publishes The CIA and the Media in Rolling Stone on October 20th, 1977. His investigation identifies over 400 American journalists who secretly worked with the CIA. The list includes journalists at the New York Times, CBS News, Time, Newsweek, Associated Press, and United Press International. These aren't fringe publications. This is the mainstream American press. Philip Graham, publisher of the Washington Post, recruits journalists for the CIA and shares intelligence with the agency. William Paley, founder of CBS, provides cover positions for CIA agents posing as reporters. The CIA creates front companies to publish books. Over 1,000 titles are produced through the 1960s. The agency places articles in foreign press, which are then cited by American media as independent sources. The propaganda laundering is sophisticated. The operation extends beyond journalism into academia. The CIA funds research, conferences, and publications supporting agency narratives. The Church Committee investigation in 1975 finds the CIA owned or subsidized over 50 newspapers, news services, radio stations, periodicals, and book publishers. Director William Colby testifies that the CIA stopped using journalists in 1973, but many experts doubt this claim. A 2008 New York Times article reveals the Army's Information Operations Program deployed military analysts as independent experts on television news, feeding them talking points while they appeared to offer objective analysis. Ramparts magazine first exposes CIA media operations in 1967, revealing agency funding of the National Student Association. The Church Committee confirms the scope in 1975. Declassified CIA documents released in 2007 provide additional details about decades of media manipulation. CIA defenders argue Mockingbird was a defensive Cold War measure. The Soviet Union had a massive propaganda apparatus through TASS, Radio Moscow, and Pravda. America needed to counter this with its own information operations. Journalists who cooperated did so patriotically, understanding the existential threat. The program ended in the 1970s when revealed, proving oversight worked. But declassified documents show the CIA didn't just plant stories about foreign threats. Domestic operations suppressed stories about CIA failures. Journalists critical of the agency were monitored and sometimes targeted. And ended in 1973? The Church Committee found the program continuing. If 400 journalists were recruited during the Cold War, how many are recruited now in our vastly larger media landscape? Some researchers argue Mockingbird never ended. It evolved. The 2013 Smith-Mundt Modernization Act legalized government propaganda targeting Americans. The Pentagon's Analyst Program, exposed in 2008, placed retired generals on TV news as independent experts while feeding them talking points. Social media provides new platforms for influence operations. What if Mockingbird wasn't an operation that ended, but a blueprint that became standard practice? How many journalists are currently working with intelligence agencies? Which specific stories were planted, and do we still believe them? How much of what we consider independent journalism is actually influenced by intelligence agencies? The questions are easier to ask than answer. From the serious business of propaganda, we turn to one of the CIA's most absurd expenditures, a $20 million program to turn cats into walking listening devices. Acoustic Kitty? The cat is lying on the operating table. It's alive, sedated. The surgeon makes an incision along its back and inserts a microphone. A radio transmitter goes in the base of its skull. A thin wire antenna is threaded along its tail. When the cat wakes up, it will be a living listening device. The project cost $20 million. It will last for one mission. Early 1960s. In CIA Directorate of Science and Technology Laboratories at Langley, Virginia, veterinary surgeons perform a procedure that would be rejected by any ethics committee today. They implant a microphone in a cat's ear canal, a radio transmitter at the base of its skull, and thread an antenna along its spine to the tip of its tail. A battery power system is wired through the cat's body to power the devices. The concept seems simple. Cats are inconspicuous. They can approach targets without raising suspicion. Train them to walk towards specific people, and you have a mobile listening device. The CIA's Office of Research and Development launches Acoustic Kitty, believing they can turn cats into espionage tools. The training phase reveals the fundamental problem. Cats ignore instructions. They wander away. They get distracted by birds. They fall asleep during tests. They seek food when they're hungry, regardless of mission parameters. Engineers try to fix this natural cat behavior through additional surgical modifications. They spend 5 years and millions of dollars trying to overcome basic feline biology. 1967, the first operational test. A Soviet compound in Washington, D.C. The target, 2 men sitting on a park bench. The CIA operatives release the cat from a van, expecting it to approach the men and capture their conversation. The cat takes approximately 3 steps before being struck and killed by a taxi. The project is canceled. A declassified memo concludes. The work done on this problem over the years reflects great credit on the personnel who guided it. The environmental and security factors in using this technique in a real foreign situation force us to conclude that for our intelligence purposes, it would not be practical. Translation: it doesn't work. Total cost: $15 to $20 million, roughly $180 million in today's money. Project Acoustic Kitty is declassified in 2001 through a Freedom of Information Act request by Jeffrey Richelson, Senior Fellow at the National Security Archive. Former CIA officer Victor Marchetti first mentioned it in his 1974 book, The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, but details were censored. Full declassification reveals the extent of the program and its expensive failure. The CIA argues Acoustic Kitty represented legitimate attempts to develop innovative technical collection methods during the Cold War. At the time, placing listening devices near targets was extremely difficult. The concept of using animals had potential. While the project failed, research and development requires trying unconventional approaches. Not every program succeeds, but the attempt was defensible. But anyone who has ever owned a cat could have predicted this would fail. The project consumed 5 years and millions of dollars before someone apparently realized cats don't take orders. The declassified memo's language, praising personnel who guided it, suggests no one was held accountable for the spectacular waste. Acoustic Kitty reveals an important truth about intelligence agencies. Massive budgets with limited oversight enable absurd projects. The $20 million wasted on cat surveillance could have funded actual human intelligence operations. But because programs are classified, there's no accountability until decades later when declassification reveals the waste. Were other animal surveillance programs attempted? Documents hint at projects involving birds and dolphins. What happened to the test cats that didn't get hit by taxis? How many other failed programs consumed millions before someone admitted they wouldn't work? The black budget hides more than successes. From the CIA's silliest operation, we end with its darkest moment, the day the agency confessed: the family jewels. CIA Director William Colby has a problem. The New York Times is about to publish Seymour Hersh's story exposing massive illegal domestic spying. Watergate has destroyed trust in government. Congress is demanding answers. So Colby does something unprecedented. He orders the agency to confess. Every division must report its skeletons. They produce 693 pages, documenting decades of crimes. It's called the Family Jewels, and it will stay secret for 33 years. December 1974. At CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, Colby orders a comprehensive internal review of potential illegalities. The document that emerges totals 693 pages. It confirms what whistleblowers and journalists had alleged but couldn't prove. The CIA had been operating as a domestic surveillance and foreign assassination organization, violating its charter and breaking countless laws. The document details Operation Chaos, where the CIA illegally spied on over 7,000 American citizens opposed to the Vietnam War. It confirms Operation H-Lingual, where the agency opened 215,000 letters in U.S. mail over 20 years. It documents assassination plots against foreign leaders: Patrice Lumumba in Congo, Fidel Castro in Cuba, Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, Ngo Dinh Diem in South Vietnam, General René Schneider in Chile. The Family Jewels confirms MKUltra, MK Delta, and other drug experimentation programs. It reveals CIA wiretaps on journalists from the Washington Post and New York Times. It details the agency's role in the 1954 Guatemala coup. It documents infiltration of domestic groups, including student organizations and religious groups. It's a comprehensive confession of institutional law-breaking spanning decades. The Church Committee confirms the document's existence in 1975, but the full text remains classified. After years of Freedom of Information Act litigation by the National Security Archive, the CIA releases a heavily redacted version on June 25, 2007. 33 years after it was written. The full unredacted version has never been released. Many believe Colby created the document as a limited hangout, an intelligence term for confessing to some crimes to prevent investigation into deeper ones. Colby is fired by President Ford in 1975 and replaced by George H.W. Bush. Whether the firing is related to the family jewels or other factors remains disputed. The CIA argues the family jewels represents responsible self-policing. When Colby learned of potential illegalities, he ordered a comprehensive internal review. The document proves the agency takes accountability seriously. Most activities were products of a different era and Cold War pressures. Reforms implemented after 1975 church committee investigations prevented recurrence. The delayed release protected sources and methods. But Colby didn't order the review because he wanted accountability. He ordered it because Seymour Hersh was about to publish. The timing proves it was damage control, not conscience. And the document was kept classified for 33 years, released only after sustained litigation, and remains redacted today. That's not accountability. That's a confession, written then buried for 3 decades. The family jewels reveals the pattern that connects everything we've examined. The CIA commits crimes for decades, gets caught, makes limited confession, promises reform, then continues under different names. Chaos becomes stellar wind. Assassination plots become targeted killings. MKUltra techniques become enhanced interrogation. The document proves the agency was out of control. The question is whether it ever came back under control or simply got better at hiding. What's in the still redacted sections over 50 years later? How many operations aren't included in the family jewels because they remained undiscovered? Have the reforms implemented after 1975 actually prevented similar abuses, or just made them harder to detect? Look at what we've uncovered. 10 operations spanning 7 decades. From MKUltra's drugged citizens to Northwoods' planned terrorism. From Midnight Climax's brothels to Guatemala's overthrown democracy. From Phoenix's assassination quotas to Condor's multinational murder. From CIA-protected cocaine to Mockingbird's propaganda. From Acoustic Kitty's absurd waste to the family jewel's buried confession. The mainstream explanation follows a predictable pattern. Each operation was a Cold War necessity that went too far. Mistakes were made. Lessons were learned. Reforms were implemented. Bad actors were removed. The system corrected itself. These were aberrations, not patterns. The actions of a different era, not a different agency. But the evidence tells a different story. These weren't isolated mistakes by rogue agents. They were official programs approved at the highest levels, documented in signed memos, funded with millions of dollars, and sustained for decades. When exposed, they weren't stopped immediately. They were buried. Documents were destroyed. Journalists were attacked. Whistleblowers were ruined. And when confession became unavoidable, it came decades late, heavily redacted, with no one held accountable. Here's what connects all 10 operations. They were exposed not because the CIA wanted accountability, but because someone forced the truth into daylight. A filing clerk who saved documents scheduled for destruction. A journalist who wouldn't stop digging despite career destruction. A congressional committee that demanded answers during a brief window of political will. A court that ordered declassification after years of litigation. Without those accidents and those fighters, we'd still believe the official story. And here's the uncomfortable question. If it took 20, 30, 50 years to expose these operations, what's happening right now that we won't learn about until 2045? What current programs will our children read about in declassified documents, shaking their heads at what their government did in secret? The gap between what governments do and what they admit is measured in decades. Most people hear these stories and move on. They accept that this was the past, that things are different now, that it couldn't happen today. The technology has changed, but has the mindset? The names have changed, but have the methods. They tell themselves that exposure means accountability, that declassification means it ended. But you watched this far, which means you're different. You understand that the pattern doesn't end with exposure. It goes underground. You recognize that declassified documents aren't accountability. They're confessions that arrived too late for justice. You see what others miss. The gap between official history and actual history. Between what we're told and what actually happened. Between the version for public consumption and the version hidden in classified archives. This channel exists for people who refuse to stop asking what else they're not telling us. For people who understand that today's classified operation becomes tomorrow's declassified scandal, but only after everyone involved has retired or died. For people who know that the most important question isn't what they did decades ago, but what they're doing right now that we won't know about for 30 years. So subscribe. Lock in your access to the archive. Because if history proves anything, it's that the conspiracy theories of today become the declassified documents of tomorrow. The only question is whether you'll be among those who saw it coming. Now go to the comments. Pick the one operation from this list that disturbs you most. The one that keeps you up at night. The one that makes you question everything else you've been told. Defend your choice. Build your case. Convince the rest of us. Let's see who presents the strongest argument. The pattern is clear. The question is, are you paying attention? They drugged unwitting citizens and called it science. They planned to bomb American cities and called it strategy. They overthrew democracies and called it freedom. They murdered thousands and called it counterinsurgency. They protected drug traffickers and called it necessary. They manipulated news and called it information operations. They spent millions on weaponized cats and called it research. Then they wrote it all down, classified it, and called anyone who suspected the truth a conspiracy theorist, until the documents were declassified. The CIA's greatest operation isn't any single program. It's convincing you that what happened then couldn't happen now. History suggests otherwise. Subscribe if you're ready to stop believing and start investigating.